Loan papers arrived cold as the Portland rain outside, slapping down in my inbox like a slap in the face. Rowan Calloway here. 45 accountant still clutching the Mont Blanc pen my mother gave me years ago. That flawless signature wasn't mine, and the real trouble. It was just the beginning. Ever had a family secret blow up right in front of you? Share your story below. It was one of those mornings when everything felt routine, the clatter of my keyboard, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the faint chill left behind by Portland's spring rain still clinging to my jacket. I was halfway through my first cup of bitter office coffee when my laptop chimed. The sound was soft, but something about it cut through the monotony like a blade. A notification banner slid across my screen. Loan approval, $500,000. Calloway Rowan. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. I don't borrow money not for myself, and certainly not $500,000. My cursor hovered over the email as the scent of hickory smoke from a food truck down the street drifted in through the cracked window. It reminded me absurdly of the summer family BBQ coming up in a few weeks, a gathering I was already dreading. The timing made the air in my narrow office feel heavier, colder. I clicked. The PDF opened in a separate window. My name, my address, even the last 4 digits of my social security number. Everything looked legitimate. The signature at the bottom was flawless, like someone had traced my hand through a pane of glass. I flexed my fingers instinctively, as if to prove to myself I hadn't signed anything. The rain-slicked street outside reflected the gray clouds like a mirror, and for a moment, it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. I reached for the phone, the stale scent of coffee rising from my mug, and punched in the number listed at the bottom of the email. The banker who answered had a voice as smooth as glass, polite but clipped every syllable precise. Yes, Mr. Calloway. The loan was processed last week, she said, pausing just long enough between phrases to make my pulse thud in the silence. Secured under family collateral as per the documents we received. Your late mother's property by the river is listed as primary security. Her words blurred for a moment like water bleeding through ink. That house, the weathered cedar siding, the soft creak of the back porch, the smell of her rose bushes after rain, it was the last place that felt like her. My fingers tightened on the receiver. Who signed these? I asked, trying to keep my voice level even as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a swarm of wasps. The signature isn't mine. Another pause. We have a notarized power of attorney on file, she replied, her tone carefully neutral as though she'd had this conversation before and knew how not to get involved. Perhaps a family member can clarify. The line clicked a polite dismissal wrapped in professionalism, and the dial tone hummed in my ear. Before I could set the phone down, my voicemail icon blinked. I tapped it, pressing the phone to my ear, and Sable's voice spilled out warm and smooth, like the bourbon she keeps in her desk. Ro, it's just paperwork, she purred. Don't make a scene. We're family. You know I wouldn't do anything to hurt us. The message ended with a soft click, as if even the machine didn't believe her. I leaned back in my chair, the springs groaning in protest, and pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Nestled beside a stack of old tax files lay a Mont Blanc pen, a gift from my mother when I graduated college. The lacquer still caught the light even after years of disuse, but I hadn't touched it since her funeral. It felt wrong, like I was breaking a seal just by looking at it. The faint smell of rain and the ghost of her perfume. Something floral and soft lingered in my memory, uninvited, but relentless. My stomach tightened. If the bank was right, that house, her house, could vanish, swept away on the back of someone else's pen stroke. I stared at the PDF again, the tidy lines of my signature mocking me the margins neat enough to frame. The edges of my vision buzzed with a kind of static I hadn't felt in years, a hum of fear and anger that tasted metallic. Then my phone vibrated against the desk, skittering an inch toward me. A new text, no contact name, just a string of numbers. Keep quiet, or you'll lose everything. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. Outside, a patch of sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting up the wet street like a spotlight, and for the first time that morning, I realized how quiet my office had become. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. I slipped the Mont Blanc pen into my jacket pocket, its weight oddly comforting like a silent promise I wasn't sure I could keep. The hickory smoke drifted in again from the food truck below, mixing with the scent of rain and stale coffee, and I thought of that barbecue of the faces I'd see of Sable smiling across a platter of ribs as though nothing were wrong. My fingers tightened around the pen, and I whispered to no one, "Let's see who's really cooking this summer." The first thing I noticed when I walked into Sable's restaurant wasn't the clatter of dishes or the thrum of conversation, but the way every set of eyes seemed to track me as I crossed the threshold. It wasn't hostility exactly, more like curiosity coated with a glaze of pity, the sort of look you give a stray dog that wandered into a wedding reception. The tang of hickory smoke from her wood-fired grill clung to the air heavy enough to stick to my shirt and settle in my hair. I knew that smell would follow me home the same way it would settle over the family when we gathered for the August barbecue in a few months. The thought made me tighten my grip on the strap of my worn briefcase, as if holding it could anchor me. Sable spotted me almost immediately, her smile wide, and practiced as she glided out from behind the bar. She wore one of those flowing linen tops that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and her perfume a sharp citrusy blend cut through the wood smoke. "Rowan," she sang as if we were long-lost friends reunited, not siblings circling a debt-fueled storm. Before I could even sit, she slid a single-page document across the polished mahogany bar. The paper looked out of place, too crisp against the wood, the neon sign above, casting a pale, flickering glow over the header, Responsibility Acknowledgement. "For the family's sake," she said, softly, leaning closer so her voice didn't carry to the tables. "It's just a formality." "You sign, the bank relaxes, and we can all move forward without more drama." "Mom would have wanted this row." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and there was a faint tremor in her hand as she tapped the signature line with a perfectly manicured nail. Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut through the hum of the dining room. Theo Whitlock, my oldest friend, and the closest thing I had to an ally in that room, brushed past a server carrying a tray of ribs and took me by the elbow. His brow furrowed, his eyes darting to the paper like it might bite. "Don't," he murmured, pulling me a few steps away toward a quieter corner near the window. The glass was streaked with grease from years of fryer mist, and beyond it, the streetlight flickered in time with the neon sign inside. "You sign that, and your retirement accounts will be drained faster than her bar tabs." "I've seen this before, Ro. You'll lose the house, the 401k, everything." Theo's words settled over me heavier than the smoke. I could hear the murmurs from nearby tables, half whispers about how hard Sable's had it, and poor Rowan always cleaning up the mess. I didn't look back at Sable, not yet. Instead, I set my briefcase down and rubbed my thumb over the edge of my pocket where my mother's Mont Blanc pen rested cool and solid against the fabric. I hadn't used it, hadn't even unscrewed the cap, but its presence was a steady reminder of her hand guiding mine when I signed my first check, back when trust meant something. When I finally turned, Sable was gone from the bar. A server pointed toward the back, and I followed the narrow hallway to her office. The door was ajar, the faint scent of lemon cleaner failing to mask the underlying odors of sweat and charred meat. Inside, a ledger sat open on the desk, pages filled with red ink and cramped notes. Supplier invoices stamped past due were paper-clipped together, one in particular from a meat distributor with a terse warning final notice. Legal action pending. I heard her heels clicking on the tile before I saw her. She stepped into the office, eyes narrowing when she realized I'd seen the ledger. "You shouldn't be back here," she said, voice tight, but still wearing a veneer of charm. She snatched up the ledger, snapping it closed, and then reached into her desk drawer. What she pulled out made my stomach twist. A power of attorney neatly notarized my signature, flowing across the bottom like a cruel imitation of my own handwriting. "Mom would have wanted this," she whispered, the edge of desperation creeping into her tone, despite the silky delivery. She held the paper up, so the flickering neon light from outside filtered through it, casting a faint glow across her face. "We can't let everything she built crumble, can we? You've always been the sensible one, Ro. Sign the acknowledgement and this goes away." The pen in my pocket felt like lead, heavier than it had that morning. I stared at the document, at the way the ink curled in perfect imitation of my hand, and something cold slid down my spine. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was the last tether to my mother, the only thing that still felt like home now, dangling over an abyss dug by Sable's debts and her need to look untouchable. Then, before I could speak, my phone buzzed sharply against the desk. The sound made Sable flinch. I glanced down at the screen. An email notification lit it up with stark black letters. "Don't sign. Call me immediately. Harlan McCreary, attorney." I slipped the phone into my palm, closing my fingers around it like a lifeline, and met Sable's gaze. Her smile was back brittle this time, the kind that cracked at the edges. I didn't say a word. Not yet. The greasy scent of wood smoke clung to my sleeves, mingling with the faint citrus of her perfume, and I knew whatever came next wouldn't be settled over a signature. Rain beaded on the diner's wide front window, blurring the neon glow from a laundromat across the street into smudges of pink and blue. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee bacon grease and the faint metallic tang of the old jukebox humming in the corner. I sat in a red vinyl booth that had seen better decades, cradling a chipped white mug with both hands, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. Across from me, Harlan McCreary studied me with the kind of calm, measured patience you only find in men who've spent a lifetime coaxing truth out of people who'd rather choke on it. His voice gravelly but even carried easily over the jukebox as he said, "I owed your mother a favor, Rowan. Looks like this is the time to make good on it." I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted to the Mont Blanc pen sitting on the table between us, its lacquered body catching the weak morning light. I'd pulled it out almost without thinking, rolling it between my fingers while I waited. Harlan's gaze lingered on it longer than I expected. "Don't let anyone take that from you," he muttered. His voice low enough that the waitress refilling coffee at the next booth wouldn't overhear. That pen's seen more honest signatures than this family's ever deserved. His lips twitched into something halfway between a smirk and a frown, like he knew the pen was more than a writing tool. He pulled a manila folder from his leather briefcase, the edges softened from years of use, and spread out copies of the loan documents across the table. The pages were weighted down by my mug on one corner and the salt shaker on the other. "Dates don't line up," Harlan said, tapping a line in the margin with one blunt fingertip. "Notarized here, filed here yet. The signature page predates both by 2 weeks. Classic rush job. The way he tapped steady and rhythmic reminded me of a judge's gavel, only quieter, more intimate, like a rehearsal for the verdict to come. "Will this hold up?" I asked, keeping my voice low as the waitress slid a plate of pancakes onto the counter behind us, the scent of maple syrup briefly cutting through the din.
"On its own. No,"
he said, leaning back so the vinyl creaked.
"But I'm not building a case on one crooked document. This."
He reached into his coat and produced a small black USB drive, setting it on the table like a talisman.
"Is the rest of the iceberg. Bank statements, supplier liens records of every late payment she's made in the last 18 months.
Enough to bury her scheme 6 feet deep if we play this right." I wrapped my fingers around the USB, feeling the cold plastic warm against my palm. It wasn't triumph, I felt more like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. Relief tinged with dread. Harlan watched me for a long moment before continuing. "Here's the timeline," he said, pulling a small notebook from his pocket and flipping it open. He sketched with a pen that looked like it had been chewed on arrows, and dates flowing together in neat, slanted handwriting. "We gather everything through 2020, recorded calls, scheduled email drops, every scrap of paper she's tried to bury." And then his eyes flicked up to meet mine, the August 2021 BBQ. That's where it all lands. The jukebox crooned some old Sinatra tune as I stared at the scrawled plan, the steam from my mug fogging the corner of the notebook.
"You're sure about the BBQ?" I asked.
"Feels theatrical."
"Exactly,"
he said, his voice almost a growl. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the smell of his aftershave faint but sharp, like cedar and smoke.
"We won't just stop her, Rowan.
We'll make sure everyone hears the truth when it counts. Public pressure does what the law can't. It breaks the performance she's built around herself." The weight of his words settled into me, heavy but grounding. I slid the Mont Blanc pen back into my breast pocket, its familiar weight against my chest like armor. For the first time in months, I felt something resembling resolve instead of exhaustion. Just as I exhaled, my phone buzzed against the Formica tabletop, skittering an inch before I grabbed it. The screen lit up with a single message from Sable Rowan, "Meet me tomorrow," or "I sell the river house by Friday." The letters burned against the dim glow of the diner. I looked up at Harlan, whose eyes narrowed, but stayed steady. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming harder against the window, as if marking time. I closed my fist around the phone, feeling the USB press into my other palm, and whispered mostly to myself, "Then we don't have time to waste." The Mont Blanc pen left her hand like a dart, clattering against the tiled floor with a sharp crack as its cap snapped free and spun across the room. The sound echoed an eerie rhythm like a clock ticking down towards something inevitable. I stood there, jaw tight, watching the lacquered body roll to a stop near the baseboard. That pen had survived every move, every job change, every late-night budget session I'd ever endured. Seeing it skid across the grime-streaked tile felt like watching the last piece of my mother's steadiness splinter under Sable's rage. Her office smelled like desperation sweat mixed with the tang of lemon cleaner that didn't quite mask the heavier scent of wood smoke drifting up from the grill below. Sable stood behind her desk, knuckles white as she gripped the edge. "You and Harlan think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, voice rising and fraying around the edges. Her hair was perfect, her blouse crisp, but her eyes told the truth, wide, bloodshot, darting toward the door, as if she expected the walls themselves to close in. Plotting behind my back, whispering to lawyers, acting like I'm the villain when all I've done is keep this family from falling apart. You owe me, Rowan. Without me, you'd still be scraping by, counting other people's money like a timid clerk. I didn't answer. Not directly. My hand slipped into my pocket, thumbing the power button on the small recorder app I'd queued up on my phone. The screen stayed dark, but I felt the faint buzz that told me it was running. Instead, I let my shoulders sag, head dipping, as if she'd broken something in me, besides the pen. "You're right," I murmured, my voice flat enough to be believable. Maybe I overstepped. Maybe I should just stop fighting. Her lips twitched into something close to a smile, though it never reached her eyes. She swept the broken pen cap aside with the toe of her shoe and gestured toward the door. "Good. Then stay out of my way. I'll handle things like I always do. One way or another, all of this will be settled, even if I have to make hard choices." I left without another word, letting my shoes thud softly down the stairs until I was halfway to the ground floor. Then I paused, ducking into the shadow of the stairwell landing, and pressed my back against the cool plaster. Through the vented slats of the stairwell door, I could hear her voice carry from her office phone, sharper now stripped of all pretense. "Yes, I understand," she said, low and urgent. A pause, a faint squeak of her chair. "The river house is worth at least 7 figures. My brother won't fight if he doesn't know it's gone until it's too late. I'll have paperwork ready by the end of the month." Her tone softened into a purr I recognized from the voicemail she'd left me weeks ago. "Trust me, this won't be a problem."
He's too soft for a fight.
A fly buzzed lazily near a flickering neon light above the landing, the hum oddly loud in the still air. I felt my teeth clench as I slipped the cracked cap from my pocket, tracing the jagged edge with my thumb. The once smooth surface felt foreign now, like the calm version of me had been stripped away along with the lacquer. "August can't come soon enough," I whispered, barely audible, even to myself, though the weight of the words grounded me more than any pep talk ever could. The fly droned on the neon, buzzed, and somewhere below the faint sizzle of the grill rose up like static. My phone vibrated in my palm, the screen lighting up with Harlan's message. Final prep. "BBQ will be her undoing. Don't blink." I closed my fingers around the phone and the broken pen cap together, their edges pressing into my skin, a silent promise that I wasn't as soft as she thought. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time I parked beneath the cedar trees, but its steady patter on the roof of my car still felt like a drum roll. The evening air carried the resinous tang of wet cedar and the heavy scent of charcoal smoke drifting from the backyard, a reminder that this wasn't just another family gathering. I slipped the repaired Mont Blanc pen into my jacket pocket, its weight a quiet anchor against the jitter running beneath my calm exterior. That pen had been shattered and mended just like me, and tonight it was more than a tool. It was a reminder that I wasn't here to fold. Inside, the house was lit with warm pools of yellow from string lights draped along the cedar beams. Condensation streaked the windows, warping the view of the garden, where laughter and clinking glasses floated through the humid air. Sable was in her element, framed by the glow, a glass of wine in one hand, as she regaled our relatives with tales of her turnaround, how she'd pulled her restaurant from the brink, how investors were lining up now. Every so often her eyes cut to me, lingering with a smile that had more edge than warmth, like she was savoring the moment before she'd corner me for the finale. I stepped aside to the hallway phone, pressed to my ear, listening to Harlan's gravelly voice on the other end.
"Everything's queued,"
he said, his tone as unflinching as ever. "Emails, attachments, timestamps, the forged power of attorney, the statements, the liens, they'll hit every inbox in that backyard,
plus the 2 creditors in 10 minutes. You just sit tight. His confidence steadied me more than I expected. Remember, you're not here to spar. You're here to let her build her tower just high enough before we knock it down. I ended the call and pocketed the phone just as Theo sidled up next to me. He didn't speak, just pressed a folded note into my hand while scanning the crowd. Stay still. Harlan's on the line, it read in his compact handwriting. I tucked the note into my jacket and walked back out to the patio, every step measured, every muscle playing at ease, even as my pulse beat like a drum beneath my collar. Dinner was served under a cedar pergola, the smell of meat fat sizzling on the grill, mixing with the sweetness of barbecue sauce. The fairy lights above cast soft reflections on the condensation-streaked windows behind us, and the air hummed with idle chatter and clinking cutlery. Sable maneuvered around the table like a conductor, her wineglass raised, as she toasted her rebuilt empire and tossed in a casual barb about how I'd been wise enough to let her handle the family's financial legacy. When she finally stopped beside me, she leaned down close enough that I could smell the citrus of her perfume over the smoke. After tonight, Ro, she whispered, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. You'll just be a broke accountant with no house, no retirement, and no say in what happens next. And you'll thank me for it. Her hand brushed my shoulder as she straightened, her smile widening for the benefit of our relatives, who clapped politely at some half-joke I hadn't heard. The Mont Blanc felt heavier in my pocket, a cold press against my ribs that grounded me in the middle of the performance. I kept my expression neutral, even as my phone buzzed softly against my thigh. I slipped it from my pocket under the table and glanced at the screen, the timer stark and unblinking, flashing 2 minutes. The scent of cedar and smoke thickened as the grill sizzled in the background, the fairy lights flickering faintly in the rising humidity. I slid the phone back into my pocket, exhaled slow, and stared across the table at Sable, her laughter carrying easily above the chatter. In 2 minutes, that laughter would freeze in her throat. The pen she slid across the table gleamed under the string lights, a sleek black barrel catching the soft glow as it came to rest in front of me. Sable's manicured fingers lingered a beat too long on the edge of the paper beneath it, her smile poised and practiced for the circle of relatives surrounding us. The night air felt thick, the cedar smoke hanging heavy as if the trees themselves had bent closer to listen. Just as I reached for the Mont Blanc in my pocket, not to use, but to feel its weight, every phone on the patio buzzed in unison. A chorus of alerts cut through the hum of conversation, followed by a single steady voice carrying over the humid air. Harlan McCreary. The speakerphone announced his gravelly tone, calm but commanding. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rowan Calloway's attorney. I suggest everyone listens closely. The patio, alive with chatter only moments ago, went still. Even the faint crackle from the grill behind us seemed to hush, as if the smoke itself had been startled into silence. Harlan's words landed like slow drops of rain on a tin roof, deliberate and heavy. We have recordings. We have statements. We have the forged power of attorney filed under Sable Calloway's name, along with documentation of outstanding debts and pending liens. If these issues aren't resolved tonight, liens will extend to family assets and shared properties. Criminal charges are already in motion, should noncompliance continue. Sable's smile faltered a twitch at the corner of her mouth, betraying the panic her eyes couldn't hide. This is a private family matter? She started, her voice slicing through the dense air, but it wavered like a weak signal. Rowan's blowing things out of proportion, and Harlan cut her off, his tone firm, unflinching. Every person here is copied on the documentation as of 30 seconds ago. You've all received the emails. Check your inboxes! This isn't a negotiation, it's a resolution. A few relatives glanced at their screens, the glow of phones reflecting in wide eyes.
The muted clink of utensils being set down punctuated the silence, as no one moved to defend her. Theo, seated across from me, gave a slight nod, his hand resting on the table like a signal to hold steady. I gripped the Mont Blanc in my pocket, feeling the smooth lacquer press into my palm, not as a signature tool, but as a reminder that for the first time in years, I wasn't the one cornered. The papers were set before sable fresh ink, waiting on the lines that would shift every shred of the $500,000 loan and its obligations solely to her. The soft scrape of her chair against the patio floor sounded louder than it should as she sat shoulders stiff. One by one she initialed and signed each stroke of her pen louder than the murmurs rising from our stunned family. When the final page was signed, the only sound was the faint sizzle of the grill, cooling behind us, each pop of dying ember sharp in the stillness. Sable pushed back from the table, her face pale under the soft string lights, and leaned close as she brushed past me. Her whisper was low, cold, almost brittle. "You think this ends here? Watch your pension row." I didn't look up as she left her heels, clicking across the cedar decking, fading into the thick summer night. Around me, no one spoke. The cedar smoke and burnt scent of cooling coals lingered as if the patio itself was holding its breath. Rain traced crooked paths down the tall windows, blurring the view of downtown Portland into streaks of gray and soft neon. The air in my new office still carried the faint scent of fresh paint, layered with the richer aroma of roasted coffee drifting up from the cafe on the first floor. I sat at the reclaimed oak desk I'd bargained for at a weekend flea market, the repaired Mont Blanc pen gleaming beside a chipped ceramic coffee cup. The cup was a relic from the old life one Theo had found for me when I first set up here, its glaze fractured like a spider web, but holding strong. Outside, the distant hum of a Max light rail train rose and fell steady and rhythmic like the pulse of a city moving on. I realized I was moving with it. The stack of client files spread across the desk painted a picture of the people I wanted to work for, now family-owned shops, struggling food carts, startups clinging to their last month of rent. The kind of businesses Sable used to pose as a savior for only to siphon off their goodwill when it suited her narrative. I flipped through a ledger for a tiny floral shop near the river, circling a note about a looming tax deadline. My own handwriting, neat and deliberate, felt like proof that I'd found a different rhythm, less about surviving, more about building. The office door creaked open, and Harlan stepped inside, shaking a few raindrops from his worn fedora before hanging it on the coat rack. He carried a slim leather folder under his arm, the kind he only brought when something mattered.
"You've made the place feel lived in,"
he said, his gravelly voice softening as he glanced at the potted fern by the window and the mismatched armchairs I'd salvaged from a liquidation sale. He set the folder on the desk and gave my shoulder a brief, firm squeeze. The warmth of his hand lingered even after he stepped back.
"Let's make something good out of the wreckage, Rowan. Paperwork's ready for the community fund. Just needs your eye before we take it to the council."
I thumbed open the folder, scanning the draft for the Portland Small Business Relief Fund, its purpose, and projections spelled out in Harlan's careful script. "Feels strange," I murmured, tracing the title with my finger. All those months, tearing things apart, and now, putting something together. "That's the point," he said, leaning against the edge of the desk.
"You don't stay in the rubble forever. You build. You use what's left, even the pieces that hurt, and make something that lasts."
Before he left, Theo popped his head in a grin, tugging at the corner of his mouth. Still using that cup, he teased, nodding toward the cracked ceramic perched beside the Mont Blanc.
"You could afford a new one now, you know."
I smiled faintly, turning the cup in my hand so the fracture line caught the light. Some things stay because they survived, I said. Not because they're perfect. Theo chuckled and ducked back into the hall, leaving the faint hiss of the espresso machine below to fill the quiet. When the door closed, I picked up the Mont Blanc pen, letting my thumb trace the faint scar in its cap. The crack, once a reminder of everything that had splintered, felt different now. I wasn't clutching it out of grief anymore. It sat easily in my hand, a tool for what came next, not a tether to what had been lost. Just as that thought settled, my computer chimed. An email alert lit the screen. City Council invites you to speak about the new fund. The words glowed against the dim reflection of rain-streaked glass, pulling me forward into the next step. Outside, another MAX train rumbled by its low hum, a steady reminder that momentum once found doesn't easily stop. The gray light of an April afternoon spilled softly through the wide windows of the community center hall, casting long, muted shadows on the polished wooden floor. The faint aroma of freshly roasted coffee drifted in from a nearby cafe, mingling with the lingering scent of wet pavement carried on a gentle spring breeze. Sitting at the head table, I picked up the Mont Blanc pen resting beside the stack of official papers. Its lacquered surface gleamed quietly, a silent testament to everything that had broken and been rebuilt. The very same pen Sable had hurled across a tiled floor years ago now felt steady and whole in my hand, a symbol not just of survival, but of promise. I rose to speak, voice measured but earnest, as I faced the gathered community members, local business owners, and supporters. I spoke about hardship and healing, about betrayal and resilience, weaving the story of loss into one of hope without ever naming Sable aloud. Her presence lingered at the back of the room, like a shadow, distant but unmistakable. Yet, this moment was not about grudges, it was about the future we could build together. With steady fingers, I signed the charter establishing the Portland Small Business Relief Fund. The pen glided smoothly across the paper, the final stroke feeling heavier than all the ones before it, anchoring a new chapter, a legacy beyond myself. As the applause settled, I caught a glance from the crowd's edge. Sable stood quietly, her eyes meeting mine briefly. She lingered for a heartbeat, then turned away, retreating into the gray afternoon without a word. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, the steady rhythm a gentle backdrop as I slipped the Mont Blanc back into my pocket. I breathed in the mingled scents of coffee and wet pavement, letting them wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt ready to let go of the ash and smoke, to savor something simple and good. Crossing the street, I pushed open the door of the cafe, the warm light and rich aroma wrapping around me like a long-awaited embrace. I ordered a coffee, the first sip, tasting faintly of hope and new beginnings. The pen in my pocket was more than an instrument. It was a promise kept a story closed and a future opened wide. The soft patter of spring rain against the community hall windows was a gentle reminder that life keeps moving, healing in its own quiet way. The Mont Blanc pen, now fully restored and smooth in my hand, wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of resilience, a bridge between the past and the future I was building. Sometimes, justice isn't just about punishment, but about renewal and the courage to start again. Life has a way of offering second chances, disguised as trials, and even after loss, there's room to create something meaningful. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story or thoughts in the comments below.